welcome back to Drinking by Myself. I'm Emma and today I'm going to talk to you about some of the most disappointing sequels that I have read. Oh, I'm out of breath from going up and down the stairs getting more beer. Hang on a minute. I've just got 3 sequels to talk to you about, and these are all sequels to books that I really loved and were really hyped up. So, to be fair to them, they had like a high standard to reach, but I found them all a big letdown, which is really sad. This must happen a lot, so let me know in the comments what were your biggest disappointments of sequels that you were really looking forward to. And here are mine. So my first one is Hidden Bodies by Caroline Kepnes. And this is the sequel to the book You. You might have seen the Netflix show. I actually thought the Netflix show was a really good adaptation of it, but the book is so much darker. The show did change quite a few things. I can see why they did it. It was probably like better TV, but I liked the book better, as always. The book You is really dark, really disturbing. Like, warning, it's super disturbing because you're inside the mind of this stalker who is sexist and violent and just horrible, but you're inside his head, so you will find yourself relating to him because, like, just by nature of the fact that you're in his head, that just happens. You're hearing his perspective and he's so convincing, and that's what makes him such a creepy and horrible villain to read, because he talks so much in a certain way that he starts making sense, and then you have to take a step back and be like, no, you're not stalking this girl for her own good. You are not solving this girl's problems by wanting to control her. Like, it's absolutely terrifying stuff. But I loved it because I am a dark little demon and I love really creepy dark books. So I was really excited for Hidden Bodies. Hidden Bodies was very different. So it's still dark, but I think the problem is, and I think this is a thing just about society, we're all so weird, we're all screwed. This happened from the book, and then it happened even more so from the Netflix show. People started to fall in love with Joe. Joe being the main character, who's this creepy stalker. In the Netflix show, it's partly because he's played by Penn Badgley, who is a very good-looking man, so lots of people started to really fancy him. But this was happening from the book already. I saw a lot of people on Twitter, like, tweeting to Caroline Kepnes, asking for more from Joe, and basically just saying that they were, like, falling in love with Joe. Which is terrifying. Guys, don't fall in love with Joe. He is an abuser. So when I read Hidden Bodies, I felt like the author had been slightly swayed by that and was therefore creating this character knowing that the audience wanted to fall in love with him and trying to, like, he's still terrible. He still does all these horrible things. And he's, you know, in the first book, he is still kind of funny. Like, he is deliberately charming. That's part of what makes it so scary. But in this one, I felt like it took out some of the darker stuff to make him this slightly more, like, funny, charming serial killer that you are sort of supposed to like. And I didn't like that as much. And also the book as a whole was just a bit sillier. So in the first book, the storyline is just his endless pursuit of this girl, Beck, and it's just absolutely terrifying. In this one, he goes to LA, and there's a few different characters, and they're all these, like, massive exaggerations of themselves. And it all just felt a bit more farcical than You did. And then the worst thing for me being, and this is kind of a spoiler, so skip forward like 10 seconds if you don't want to know, is at the end of this book he kind of gets a redemption arc. And I really didn't want that for him at all. I didn't think that he deserved that. Okay, you can come back, you're safe now. So for those reasons, some of which you saw and some of which you may have skipped through, I thought this was quite a disappointing sequel to what was a really dark and disturbing but clever first book. Next, we have Fredrik Backman. Well, this wasn't disappointing. This is Beartown by Fredrik Backman, one of my favourite books of all time. I read the sequel on my Kindle, so I don't have it to show you, and that was called Us Against Them, or Us Against You. I called it Us Against Them in another video I did recently. It's called Us Against You. And that one, for me, also was really disappointing, partly because it was so hyped up, because I love Beartown so much, but I've been thinking a lot about it, why I found it so disappointing, because the writing is still great. Fredrik Backman's a beautiful writer, and I think the reason is, so Beartown, if you don't know what it's about this small town hockey team, and the town is very much dependent on them, so you get to see a lot of the different characters, you see how embedded in their whole town culture this hockey team is. So when one of the boys on the hockey team rapes a girl from the town, they're not inclined to believe her, because they are so rooting for this team and all of the boys on it. So it's a really gritty topic, and it's very sad to read. It made me really angry to read, but it was just fantastic. But at the end, as the book goes on, and I'm not going to say anything that's like a spoiler, but the end of the book, which is like the very end, has this really hopeful, lovely ending that kind of turns the story away from the boys on this team and moves it towards a new hope for the girls of the town. which I loved, and I just like cried onto the page. I thought it was fantastic. So I guess, by nature of that, going back to do a sequel at all was already going to be a flawed idea, because the sequel takes place immediately after the events of the first book, rather than going forward to this future. So having read this whole book, got really, really angry and upset at the masculinity and the focus on the masculinity in this book, and then cried with relief and happiness and hope over the end, to then go straight back into the action and just be back with these boys, I felt like I was done with them. And I felt a bit like let down by that, because I was kind of done with them. I wanted the story to move on from them and move on to this new hope that could have started from the girls in the town. That's how I felt. I also did think that Fredrik Backman is very, very beloved for his kind of heartwarming stories. And this one is very gritty, but it still has his same heartwarming, inspirational style. But it's the perfect level of never being too obvious, being too kind of saccharine. Whereas in Us Against You, I felt like he was slightly more self-aware. But self-aware sounds like a good thing, but kind of self-conscious about it. Like, he knows that that's why people like his books. So it felt like it was a lot of deliberately quotable lines. So it didn't feel as genuine as Beartown. It felt a bit more like a book that was designed to make you emotional. And the second I can tell I'm being emotionally manipulated, I feel very resistant to it, and I won't let you emotionally manipulate me. So I was not going to cry at Us Against You, because I was like, I see what you're doing, Fredrik Backman. I don't want any of this. So an incredibly, incredibly powerful first book that I absolutely recommend you should all go and read. And I would just suggest don't bother with the sequel, because it doesn't forge anything new from that storyline. It just revisits beloved characters. So I did enjoy it, because the characters in the first one were, really, really well written, in-depth characters. And so going back to their lives is always going to be interesting. And some of not all of the boys in Beartown are horrible. There are some really fantastic male characters. And going back to them, I loved seeing what they did next. But I don't think it did anything new with them. I don't think I needed that story. And sometimes when a first book is so perfect, it's actually, even if you love those characters, you don't want to hear anything more about their lives, because you've already had the perfect amount of storytelling. And that's a testament to this first book. It was just a perfect book on its own. You should never have done a sequel. I'm sorry, Fredrik Backman, I love you, but you should never have done a sequel. And my third disappointing sequel is Ogre Enchanted by Gail, Carson, Levine. So Ella Enchanted, as I'm sure you all know, is my favourite book from my childhood. And it's this incredibly feminist retelling of Cinderella. The story of Ella Enchanted being that Ella has a curse placed on her as a baby. It's supposed to be a gift from a fairy. The fairy sees it as a nice thing, and she gives her the gift of obedience, which of course is a terrible thing. So Ella is then compelled to do whatever anybody tells her to do, which is very dangerous and very limiting. And I viewed it as this metaphor for the female experience, basically, for the kind of enforced passivity that is placed on women. And that the Cinderella story, the traditional Cinderella story, embodies and kind of describes it as this virtue that women should have, and that you will get rewarded for it by being married off to a prince. Whereas Ella Enchanted doesn't take that route at all, doesn't let that happen. Ella is not content with being obedient, and the story is about her setting out to break that curse and to set herself free from those limits. So it's just a wonderful story. It's so empowering. I read it when I was a child, and I'm sure that it did, fantastic things for like kickstarting my feminism. I think it's brilliant. So finally, she wrote a sequel, or a prequel actually. This one should have said disappointing sequels and prequels. Ogre Enchanted. Ella is not in this book, which was a blessing, because I didn't want, just like I said in the other one, I don't want anything to ruin her story. It was perfect. But a lot of the other characters were, which was fun. So starting with the positives, it was really, really fun to meet some of the characters from the original book early in their lives. And these are side characters. So we meet Ella's mother, who dies right at the beginning of Ella Enchanted. So it was fantastic to kind of get to know her as a character, and I thought her characterization was perfect. I felt like I got to know her better in a way that only added to the original story. So that was really positive. And then there are some more, even more side characters that you meet again. But the story was so disappointing for me, because I was coming at it from this Ella Enchanted being so feminist angle. So Ogre Enchanted is a fairy tale that we've kind of already heard. So the same fairy from Ella Enchanted places a curse on our main character, Evie, turns her into an ogre because she rejects a proposal from a man that she's not in love with. And so Lucinda turns her into an ogre and says, you have 62 days to make someone fall in love with you and accept their marriage proposal, otherwise you'll be an ogre forever. So, not a super unique storyline. It's basically Beauty and the Beast. It's sort of Shrek. Like, we do know these stories. Which isn't a problem, because Ella Enchanted is basically the Cinderella story retold, so that's fine. Retelling a fairy tale is a great way of starting a story, often. But my problem was, she didn't really retell it. It was just Beauty and the Beast, but in the world of Ella Enchanted, kind of just for the fans, really. It didn't actually do anything new with the material, and it was definitely not an empowering story. So I am now going to go into some plot points, so spoilers if you don't want them. The main thing that I found really, really disappointing by the end of it is, so Evie at the beginning doesn't want to get married. She's not interested in marriage. She massively loves her childhood friend as a friend. His name is Wormy, by the way, which is very strange. She thinks Wormy is great, they're best friends, but she's just not in love with him. She doesn't feel that way about him. So when he proposes to her, she says no, as she's entitled to do. Then this fairy comes and places a curse on her, and what I was expecting was that, just like in Ella Enchanted, Evie wasn't going to break the curse by just doing what the fairy wanted. She was going to find some way to subvert it. Possibly it would mean living as an ogre forever, or breaking it in some other way, I don't know. But that isn't what happened. By the end of this book, she realises that she is in love with Wormy after all. He proposes, and she says yes. And that's how she's turned back into a human. So rather than subverting anything or giving her agency back, the story was basically saying, the fairy was right all along. You were wrong to think that you didn't want to get married. You just had to learn the magic of love. I would have loved it if by the end of the story, she was like, no, I told you I'm not interested in marriage, and I'm not interested in marriage. I just was very surprised that this even came from the same person who wrote Ella Enchanted. And I think that it was because Ella Enchanted is so beloved, and I feel like this story was born from just trying to write something in the same world to please people who like that world, rather than trying to tell a worthy story of its own. So I'm really, really sad that I didn't love this one, because I was really looking forward to it. And I also just hate to criticise Gail, Carson, Levine, because I think she's great. She was really lovely when I was writing my dissertation. She responded to something that I wrote to her. So yeah, I'm really sad to say anything negative about anything Gail, Carson, Levine does, because I think she's great. Oh, my legs have gone dead. Oh, so what are your most disappointing sequels that you've read? And I will steer clear of them. Do let me know in the comments below. And of course, give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and hit that subscribe button below for new videos every week. See you next time.